If you're avoiding carbs because you're afraid of blood sugar spikes, you're training fasted because someone said it burns more fat, or you think insulin is a problem, is the enemy of fat loss, but you're still dealing with energy crashes, inconsistent performance, you don't have the fat loss results you want for the effort you're putting in, then this episode is for you. Today, my guest, who has been managing type 1 diabetes for 25 years, has learned a lot about metabolism, insulin, and body composition. And he is going to clarify some of those topics: carb timing, insulin sensitivity, fat loss, that the industry often gets wrong. So listen in, tune in, because you're going to learn a ton about blood sugar, carbs, and fasting that will help you focus your efforts to optimize your metabolism and finally get the results you want. Welcome to Wits and Weights, the show that helps you build a strong, healthy physique using evidence, engineering, and efficiency. I'm your host, Philip Pape, and today we're going to discuss how someone living with type 1 diabetes has developed strategies that are going to help you, help everyone when it comes to building muscle, optimizing health. Some of these are going to be counterintuitive. Yes, we're going to get into carbs and blood sugar and some of the hot topics because they are important. My guest is Ben Zeal, a registered dietitian, certified diabetes educator, and certified strength coach who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 7. And rather than letting this limit him, he's built a successful practice called Your Diabetes Insider and helps thousands of people with diabetes live unrestricted lives while maintaining excellent blood sugar control, which is an amazing thing because I definitely get that sense of frustration and sometimes hopelessness from individuals who feel like, you know, their medical history and their genetics are holding them back in some way. Ben's got over 25 years of personal experience, advanced credentials in nutrition and strength training. He's tested every approach from high carb to low carb to intermittent fasting, and it's developed kind of a hybrid approach that optimizes muscle building and glycemic control. So today, I think you're going to learn a lot about myths like CGMs, how useful are they, how to use them, how to navigate the carb confusion based on the evidence, his tips on building muscle while managing blood sugar to help you go after gains, whether you have diabetes or not. With that, Ben, welcome to the show.
I am so excited to be here. And that was honestly the nicest intro anyone's ever done. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, man. And it's well-deserved. We were talking before we were recording how we connected, and we haven't had someone talk about diabetes specifically on the show, especially who has lived it. There's a lifter out there. She's called the Canadian Forklift. Do you know Jessica Bittner? Which I'd love to have.
I don't know her.
No,
I don't know her personally, but I know. Oh, I know who she is, and she's. I mean, my God, I would love to be just in remotely that stratosphere.
Yeah. No, but it's inspiring because, like in our Facebook group, when I hear from clients, mainly people who haven't worked with me yet. And you'll hear that sense of like, well, because I have diabetes, I can't X, Y, Z. And I want to bust some of those today with you. So let's get into it. Let's start with blood sugar in general, because there's some science and mechanisms behind this, how the body works. And I guess I would say, if there's one thing everyone could understand about blood sugar, what would that be?
Oh man, this is such a good question too. I feel like, and it's tough, right? Because I feel like as a person with diabetes, it's obviously a different perspective because I'm over here thinking, well, I have to stay in range, or at least relatively in range the majority of the time. But someone without diabetes, you got all the, I don't call it hysteria, but the fascination with what's my glucose right now. So the biggest thing is to not overreact to the blips that you see with blood sugars. And a perfect example of this would be, one time, it was probably 3-4 years ago, went out to breakfast with one of my friends. He was a dietitian as well, and he doesn't have diabetes. And so I figured, you know what, let's see what happens. You're wearing a CGM. You got a CGM from, your healthcare provider, whoever it was. Let's compare. Let's eat the same pancakes. Let's see what happens. And it was hilarious. Of course, as a person with diabetes, I'm going to see more of a rise just because it was carbs and it was a good amount. These were chocolate chip pancakes. Like, we didn't hold back. We had just lifted. And my blood sugar went up probably 160, 170. His blood sugar, I cannot make this up, 94. He went from like 85 to 94. And he's, oh my God, I went up 9 points. And I'm thinking, man, I would love to go up 9 points eating some chocolate chip pancakes. So I think a lot of people, especially without diabetes, they see these changes in the graph, like, oh my goodness, my blood sugar just spiked. But you have to really put it in perspective. Was it a substantial enough spike to really warrant any sort of concern?
Yeah, no. So let's talk about that. Do people so we're kind of covering two populations here, but do people have to be concerned based on the range that they sit at with a baseline or based on the variance? Who should even measure this?
Oh, it's tough. And so I think if we're going diabetes specific first, just to kind of, parse it out, diabetes specific first, I would say it's more of the time that you are in range, right? So the standard for a Dexcom, which I would consider the gold standard for CGM, is typically on default 70 to 180. If you tell me you're 80%, 85% in range, you're doing awesome, because as people with diabetes, you're probably not going to be 100% in range unless you're just straight up not eating, or you have everything just completely perfect and all you do is diabetes in your life, which is not realistic. But for people without diabetes, I would say, I mean, it's tough, right? Because yes, you want to stay in a controlled range, and ideally you don't ever want to go above 130, 140 if possible. And that would mean you ate a lot of carbs in one sitting and did not do anything to insulin sensitize yourself. So I think the biggest thing is variability matters. I think range matters, but I think time within the range. And if you don't have diabetes, the smaller the range, the better.
Okay. And that makes a lot of sense. And then you mentioned a phrase in there that's going to be a trigger where we should latch on to: insulin sensitize yourself. I love that put into a control based language, right? Like it's something that you can do about it. So let's talk about eating carbs and the result. And what are you talking about when you talk about sensitizing yourself?
So I typically mean it in the context of what are you doing? And this will be, if we go without food for a second, what can you do outside of food to get your body in a prime position to be able to absorb the carbs and the sugar that's within the blood, right? And so, of course, there's two main ways the body can do it. There's insulin, right? Of course. And then there's also, with physical activity, using the calcium channels, you can basically do the same mechanism, but not have insulin involved. So people are like, oh, if I take a walk after I eat, my blood sugar doesn't go as high, because you've now started allowing your muscle to take up that glucose from the blood without doing anything else. And so that's what I typically refer to. So if I tell people, hey, you're very active, you're walking, you're lifting, whatever you might be doing, that's going to put you in a prime position to have a little more variability and wiggle room. So your number may not spike as high depending on what types of carbs you're eating. So that's typically my primary way, I would say, from an insulin sensitivity standpoint. Nailed it. There we go.
Cool. Nice. So walking and lifting and muscle are some of the phrases you mentioned, and there's confusion around how that works. So I often use colloquial language here for two reasons. One is, hey, I don't know all the science at any one time, like out of my head. And number two is that's what people understand as analogies, right? So the idea that the bigger your muscles, the more they can hold and store in terms of glucose, as well as the more active you are, the more you shuttle those nutrients. You talked about calcium channels. So maybe break it down, like when you walk, just in that moment, what is happening?
So basically, in a nutshell, just imagine that there's these gates, right? And you have to have a certain molecule attached to a gate, and there's 4 gates, or a combination lock, whichever one's easier for you to imagine. And basically, you just have to turn the lock to have each of the things in the code get open. And once you do 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, it's open, and the glucose can come in. So it's that simple. And at that point, because you're walking and you're in motion, these gates will stay open. They'll continue sucking up glucose into the cell, pulling it out of the blood. And that allows your blood sugar to either not rise as high, or, in the case of someone whose blood sugar might be already high at baseline, to bring it down.
Awesome. And does being sedentary have an amplifying negative effect? And by that, I mean, is it simply, this is an important question, right? Is it simply not giving you the benefit of walking, or is it amplifying the worsening of that effect of not using insulin?
Oh man, I love these questions. These are the things that I always wish people ask, but I never get asked. So I think it's both, right? I think if somebody's body is used to a certain amount of activity at baseline, and I've seen this in myself, I've seen this with patients all the time, where let's say your body's used to 8,000 steps per day, and today you just decided to hang out, have a lazy day, Netflix, whatever, you are going to see that negative impact because your body is already used to a certain baseline and you're not even close to approaching that. So you might notice insulin resistance just because you're not moving compared to your norm. So I think there's that aspect of things where you're not giving your body what it wants. You start walking, your insulin sensitivity goes back, your blood sugar goes right back in the range. It is absolutely unreal how specific that is. And I've seen it with myself and many, many, many people. But I also think just at baseline in general, if you're not moving, it's not doing you any favors. And that doesn't mean you need to be in perpetual motion on a treadmill or a walking pad, but I think your body really appreciates, our bodies are meant to move, right? Our body needs to stay in motion.
Loves to move, loves to lift, loves to be functional and active in the world. And so when you think of someone with diabetes like yourself, I've heard the claim, and maybe it's true, right? That the walking after meals is as effective or more than metformin, right? Than a diabetes medication. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how can diabetics actually, can they manage to an extent where they can limit or eliminate some of their pharmacology from their lifestyle? How important is all this for that?
Well, I would joke that I'm married to a pharmacist, but I'm not the pharmacist, so I can't answer completely, right? But what I would say is from a efficacy standpoint, walking after meals or really any sort of light activity post meal can do absolute wonders. You just can't expect it to do all of the heavy lifting, metaphorically, of the medication. So, for example, if someone's on insulin, or if I'm on insulin and I go out to dinner and I know, okay, I had a ton of carbs, I'm going to walk after this meal, it will definitely blunt the ability for my blood sugar to keep rising. But then if I walk for 10 or 15 minutes, when I stop moving, if my blood sugar was going to keep going, it's going to keep going up. Like, it's not just going to completely stop and, oh, everything's perfect now. But also it depends on the duration you're walking and you know, a bunch of other factors.
That's good to know. So it's a matter of degrees. And again, that reinforces why you need to measure that when it's a concern for you. And when it's not, it sounds like just being active and lifting could probably be enough. I mean, I don't measure I've never measured my blood glucose, and I don't plan to, because, you know, I kind of understand the science that you're talking about. And I've had guests on who are big advocates for it. And one of the reasons they say it's helpful for non-diabetics maybe is to see the results of your food balancing, right? Like when you balance your macros, you're having enough protein, fats, along with the carbs. How important is food balance and blood sugar management from that perspective?
I would say food balance, diabetes or not, food balance is going to be imperative. And like you're saying, right, if somebody's, hey, my macros are being hit, and I'm one of the people who's more liberal with, I don't care how you do it. As long as you do it, you can break the protein up in, you know, certain amounts, whatever fits in your life. But if you want intermittent fast, go for it. You want to be lower carb, go for it. If you hit your numbers, you hit your numbers. But from a blood sugar standpoint, I will say having fat and protein at meals will help with not spiking quite as high as you possibly could. But on the flip side, there's people who, and I don't advocate for this way of eating, but there's people in diabetes land who will basically just eat carbs, nothing else, just carbs, basically no fat, basically no protein. And their blood sugars are just fine because there's no potential for anything to slow down digestion, anything to induce insulin resistance. So there's these different camps, and within diabetes land too, you get the people on the low carb side. So I think everyone always asks, what's the best way to eat with it? And I don't think there's necessarily a perfect method, or we would all do it. But on the flip side, I think that from a food standpoint, you have to have balance within it. Otherwise, you're going to spike more than you want to.
Okay. And then to extend that, very interesting. You talk about the like only carb approach. I feel bad for those guys, because as much as I love carbs, I got to have my protein in when you're lifting. But it does bring up the restriction in the extreme camps and the reasons people do diets, which are often, I'll say, flawed. And it saddens me, because if you're going to do something, it should be intentional for a purpose. And if you're doing it for the wrong purpose, then you're just shooting yourself in the foot. The big one is just cutting carbs for XYZ, right? Cutting carbs to lose weight. No, that's energy balance. Cutting carbs because we think it's going to cause more fat storage. That's a whole topic about, again, insulin sensitivity and the flawed hypothesis related to fat burning versus glucose. It's just two energy systems that, you know, it all balances out. What are your thoughts then on someone on diabetes who doesn't quite understand this and is afraid of carbs? What are your thoughts on that?
So my first thing is I give them an ice cream sundae. No, I'm totally kidding. But, you know, my thing with that is,
here's a pizza.
First of all, well, literal pizza is like the most biggest nightmare for most people with diabetes. We fix it. But something I would say is, somebody's nervous around carbs, which happens all the time, because you get this dysfunctional relationship with food, because everyone says you can't have this, you can't have this, you can't have this, which does not serve anybody. I'm always trying to figure out, my team's always trying to figure out, where does this come from? Where does this stem from? Was it one bad incident? Was it one care provider early on in your diabetes career, if we're going to call it that, that may have led you astray? And then from there, how can we challenge this? Because I'm not asking you to eat a whole pizza, but we also can't have you concerned about a bowl of Cheetos that's next to you because you're concerned about what it's going to do to your blood sugar. So at the end of the day, it's going to be, hey, how can we get you to slowly break out of this comfort zone? If it's something that you're interested in doing that will work for your blood sugar management, because to a degree, are carbs needed? We could debate that, and that's I love that topic in general, but you don't necessarily need carbs if you live with diabetes, but a lot of people feel better. And so to me, I'm like, if you can have a less restrictive life, you already have enough things going on with diabetes. Let's make it less restrictive, but also be able to still balance your blood sugar. I don't see any problem with it. So slow, steady exposure, I think, will be what ultimately saves it.
Yeah, and that sounds sustainable to me. So then let's tie this all back to lifting, which we alluded to a little bit, but one of my favorite topics, specifically your approach to training that makes the most sense for building muscle from a blood management perspective. And if the answer is, look, just any training approach that's effective to build muscle and strength is all you need. But where I'm going with this is I understand there's some science around blood sugar management, insulin sensitivity with the training session itself, the stimulus, recovery, adaptation, inflammation post training, and then the fact that you have this tissue on your frame. And like, is it more important to focus on neuromuscular strength versus hypertrophy? You know, like I'm giving you a lot here, but it's also a blank canvas. So go for it.
Oh man, these are like the types of questions that make me wish that I had stuck with the PhD I was doing for a while. I was doing that before I became a dietitian. I was like, I'm going to go get a PhD and only study diabetes and macronutrient composition and body composition, and I would have been doing exactly what you're describing. And then I was like, I'm going to be a dietitian. I like people. So that being said, with all of these questions, I would say from a training perspective, it all kind of folds into itself, right? Because like you said, having more muscle at baseline ideally means more insulin sensitivity, easier for the muscle to have the ability to bring glucose into the cell. Everybody's happier that way. But at the same time, from a training perspective, if you train at all, there's potentially up to a 72-hour window of increased insulin sensitivity, depending on your level of training. Now, someone like me, I've trained for, I don't know, more than half my life. So at that point, I'm probably not getting a 72-hour boost. I'm probably getting it closer to a 24-hour boost, but it's still something. So that first step is for most people, they're not doing anything. Hey, let's get you started working out with something that you like. I don't really care what it is. Preferably there's resistance training a few times a week. But as you really start getting into the weeds, how can we get you from a hypertrophy standpoint and then some of the muscular endurance standpoint? I think a combination of those two, it doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be any sort of, linear undulating periodization, but something of that nature where we can get both. We get the best of both worlds where, hey, there's going to be muscle on your frame, but also you have the ability, if you decide to go, do some sort of crazy 20 rep set, you can still get through it and still get the benefits from an insulin sensitivity standpoint. Because for hours later, you're going to be, especially the first 12 hours, you're going to be more sensitive.
Nice. And are you an advocate of bulking, cutting? If you prefer people to stay at maintenance and do it slowly, does it matter? Like it's preference?
I think it matters where your blood sugar control is first, because in my mind, I don't really want you doing anything crazy until I know your numbers are not going to look like the Rocky Mountains.
Cool.
Because otherwise, at the end of the day, when your blood sugar is higher, everything's is more dysfunctional because your blood literally moves slower through the body. It's like syrup instead of normal blood flow. So that's not going to help you with recovery. And then with low blood sugars, you can't train. So if your blood sugar is constantly bouncing, we got to stabilize that first. Ideally, if somebody's eating too little and their metabolic rate is slow, fix that at the same time, then say, okay, now let's go body comp, let's go.
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of that as well, of like priming your body for success in a maintenance mode where you're not stressing it out with these other things. So once you've got that in place, tying it back to carbs, do you find does it make a difference when folks like really throw the carbs into their diet and they're trying to build muscle? Or do you find that it's very personal?
I find it tends to be more energy balance focused and protein focused. But what I will say is from a carb perspective, if you're trying to lift heavier, of course, you and I both know it's going to be like rocket fuel. So you tell someone who's eating 80 grams of carbs per day, oh, hey, we're going to slowly up it. Oh, now you're at 160 and suddenly they're deadlifting more than they've ever done and they're feeling amazing. That's probably just a function of the carbs. But from a carb standpoint, I don't really feel like it's 100% necessary. Like I've done, like you mentioned earlier in the intro, I've gone all the way down to 40 grams of carbs per day. I think I was eating 3,300 at maintenance and I was still lifting heavy and it was rough, but I could still do it. And then on the flip side, I've gone all the way up to close to 500 per day and it was great. Lifting was great. My blood sugars, on the other hand, were not as amazing at the time. I was also in college, so different conversation, but it's definitely possible.
Yeah, it's good to understand that the experimentation you went through itself is the missing piece for a lot of folks, in my opinion, in that, like, I think of clients who start with me, and I think of one in particular who was afraid of carbs and wanted to work with me just to eat more carbs. He doesn't have diabetes, but my answer to a question would be a question like, why don't you try it and let me know? Because at the end of the day, that's all you can tell. So it sounds like, when you get the blood sugar managed properly, when you're eating in a balanced way, when you've got some reasonable targets for your performance, for your activity, you can then start to tweak the dials, right? And push one way or the other and see. And that sounds like a nice, safe approach to do it, even if you are a little bit fearful at first because you've proved to yourself, right, through the data where you're at. So what kind of data, what kind of metrics do you like to track?
So of course, blood sugars, right? For most of the people that come to our practice, they have a continuous glucose monitor or they have some way to measure their blood sugar consistent. So that's going to be imperative because again, everything in my world and our world, branches out from that. Mm-hmm. But I would say total macros are going to be massive as well. And especially, the calories and the protein. And for our sake, we look at the carbs simply as a function of how do they relate to the blood sugars? Because again, if someone comes in and they're eating 400 carbs a day, I'm not going to suddenly cut them to 200. I'm not going to increase it either. I want to get an idea of, okay, if we have this here, Are your numbers any more steady now that you're paying closer attention? And then from a training perspective, okay, how many days per week are you training? What's your intensity of your training? I like when people track the numbers. Not everybody does. So everyone's got a different commitment to activity, and you know this only too well. But, if I can get that data too, I love it. We'll look at labs. We'll look at the whole picture as much as we can. But typically from a diabetes standpoint, it's, can we look at the food? Can we look at the blood sugars? How do they interlink? And then ultimately, what decisions can we make based on this?
Cool. And you mentioned labs. So what are you looking at there for blood work?
So of course, A1C, because that's going to be technically the average of the blood sugar over the last 3 months. A little more complicated, but it's generally the gist. That one's going to be a big one. We do like thyroid because for two reasons. One, and especially in type 1 diabetes land, where it's almost like a buy one, get one free for autoimmune disorders. Thyroid tends to be one of the ones that goes. And so we like to keep just an eye on that to ensure that that's not getting out of hand. And, we don't prescribe, but we'll tell people, hey, we see this. Maybe consider talking to your doc about this, your endocrinologist, your PCP, whoever. Those are two of the big ones. We'll look at, the CBC, CMP, all the lipids, just to make sure everything's, behaving itself. And every now and then there's something that's off, but it's nothing typically wild. And for some of the men, especially as men get older, we do like to look at the testosterone. Yep. Similar with women, we'll look at the estrogen, because that can have a pretty big impact on blood sugar as well, especially as those levels start to decline.
Yeah, makes total sense. So then, like with the A1C, another thought that came to mind is the correlation between that and what are the biggest factors, right? And I know just simply managing your weight and body fat, people are always surprised to learn how much of an impact that does have, independent of everything else. What are your thoughts on like the 2 or 3 biggest hitters for A1C?
I would say the first one for A1C, I think far and away is if you're on insulin, is your dosing on point? If you're not on insulin, is your medication on point? Because without that at baseline, right, you're going to be already behind the 8 ball. And I don't care if someone's the best carb counter in the world. If your insulin to carb ratio is wrong, it's not going to matter. Your blood sugar is going to be all over the place. So that, dosing mixed with carb counting and technically protein and fat counting, that's always far and away number one. I would say number 2 would be the activity side of things, because with that, I remember vividly, there was one patient, usually trains like 4 or 5 days a week. And he, for whatever reason, for 2 weeks just didn't train. His blood sugar average went up 15 points just from not training. Ate the same, everything else the same, just went up 15 points, which in A1C world, that's going to be almost half a point or a little more than half a point. Like that's a substantial difference, especially from a long-term complication risk. So that's going to always be number 2. And then number 3 for A1C, believe it or not, stress. Stress will wreck you, absolutely wreck you.
Yeah. You mentioned stress. Isn't that the common denominator with everything? Like even
literally,
I just recorded an episode about chronic inflammation and how like the biggest drivers are related to lifestyle. I mean, visceral fat is a driver, but like, you and I talked about being sedentary and not having that blood flow and how that affects insulin sensitivity and blood sugar. Well, that's also stress. That's lifestyle. It's all interrelated. And yet it's one of the things that it's not sexy to talk about, right? Sleep and stress. We all need more sleep and less stress. So speaking of stress, I think about things that stress our body, right? One of those is a calorie deficit, but another would be potentially fasted training. I'm curious of your thoughts about fasted training. Yeah. Just go.
As I sit here, literally having trained fasted right before we're talking right now.
Okay.
I personally do it. Some people love it. Some people hate it. The reason I do it is twofold, right? I don't have any insulin on board from any sort of boluses, which in my world just makes life slightly simpler. So I don't have to worry about my blood sugar potentially falling off a cliff. And I don't have to worry about any food in my system for that. Some people don't like it because, there should be something in your system before. For me, it's like from a muscle standpoint too, I know there's the potential for breakdown. I know there's ways to mitigate that. I just see it as the trade-off. I'm like, if I still hit my targets throughout the day, I'm going to be fine. As long as from a muscle standpoint, may I break a little bit more down than the average person? Yes. But if it's kind of in my mind, it's like SPF 30 where you block 98% of the sun, or SPF 70, you block 99. It's like, is that little teeny 1% difference going to really make that big a difference? If my numbers are happier, which is going to make everything better in the long term, I'll take the happier blood sugars. But I think it's totally viable. Some people, if their blood sugar still crashed, then they need to have a concern with that, but we'll work through it. But I personally do it and I love it.
Cool. So you do it for blood sugar purposes?
Mainly blood sugar, also just convenience. Like I like just having it done, then I can do what I want to do.
Cool.
Yeah.
Which is with intention, with purpose. Like I think that's the main theme, is that people are thinking I should do fasted training because it's better for fat loss or something. And I think that doesn't work. And also like you said, you've got to look at the cons, and they're actually insignificant. Like we know now from recent protein research that you could distribute it just about however you want. And it's like a couple % difference, right, in outcomes. and it sounds like you've been training a long time. So you've like got a big baseline, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I just wanted to get that out for people. It's like, sure, you could do it if it's convenient. It's like intermittent fasting. Like the main reason you do that is it's probably convenient for you and maybe it helps you control your calories, right? Like it's not autophagy and longevity and all that stuff. Do you agree?
I'm going to laugh and say this too. I also intermittent fast, and I only do it because I like eating 2 larger meals. I do not care about everything else. Like that's just how I like to do it. And from autophagy, everything, if there's a little benefit, cool. But I'm not doing it because, it'll, for sure help me live 8 minutes longer per day. Like, no, it's just, if you like it, like it. If you don't like it, then don't do it.
And that's, I think, a great approach. Like, people talk about restrictive diets too, and, carnivore, keto, this and the other. I'm like, look, if you like meat and liver and eggs as your diet, you love it. You think you can do that the rest of your life. You feel great. You perform. You're not worried about the consequences of not having fiber, whatever. Go for it, right? Like I'm not here to tell you what to do or what not to do, but rather to say that don't let others fearmonger you into thinking you have to do this. It's like the two opposites. Is there what is your biggest boogeyman right now that we haven't touched on in the industry?
Oh, geez. I mean, I'm besides, carnivore, which I don't even think carnivore is a problem. I just don't think most people can stick to it for longer than 3 weeks.
That's the main thing. Yeah.
GLP-1s, not even a question.
Okay.
I don't think that's even a question. I think because it's everywhere, it's pervasive, and it's fine. But I think a lot of people view them in a really skewed way. Diabetes or not.
Continue. Tell me more. When you say skewed, because we're probably on the same page with this, the nuance. But yeah, let me hear it.
So with it, I mean, the irony is they were initially developed for people with diabetes, right? And for people with diabetes, they can do amazing work. And I'm grateful that they exist. But then when it became, they can help with weight loss, everyone just assumes, I'm going to take this thing, it'll be fine. And then I'll lose all this weight. And I mean, the studies, you've seen them. The studies show that once you get off of it, if you don't change anything, you're done for. You're just going to gain it all back and then some. It's just like anything else. And I tell people, I'm like, it's basically a manufactured calorie deficit because you're feeling disgusting. So you don't want to eat anything. It's like you could do the same thing. You want to track and put in a little effort. But I always will say, if you want to use it, and I've had patients use them with amazing success, and I think they're incredible if they're used as a springboard. If you do everything else with them, if you do the nutrition side, if you do the exercise side, and then from a blood sugar standpoint in our population, if you do the blood sugars, have that on point, it will work incredibly. I've had people lose well over 100 pounds, and they're amazing. But the key is to not have it so you're so reliant on them that the moment that they're out of the picture, you're completely SOL. That's the problem. And I think so many people just want to use them as this crutch and say it's the magic answer. And in that case, it's not.
Yeah. Okay. I 100% agree. I mean, that's what it comes down to. It's like, and I know you referred to your holy trinity, I think, right? Nutrition, training, blood sugar. And I guess for me, without thinking as much about the blood sugar for non-diabetics, it's like nutrition, training, and lifestyle. Same idea. The whole thing is use it as a tool to help with the potentially gene-related appetite dysfunction you have with your brains, which we know is a real thing, and it's exacerbated based on your history, and then do the lifestyle and then come off of it. And I also have worked with clients who are like on tirzepatide, which is one of the more powerful ones, who say like, look, I am doing a lot of the things, but now I'm worried that when I come off, I'm just going to start gaining all the weight back. And I think there's like a titration method for that. So given that you work with diabetic population, who's probably taking the original Ozempic, right? Like the OG, right, for diabetes, how do you work with them to come off of that as a strategy?
Oh, and so the fun thing is the two things I'll say is one is for Mounjaro, for whatever reason, it just seems like it works better. I've never taken it personally, but I've seen in the probably 3 dozen people we've had who are on it. It always seems like Mounjaro skews with better results. Ozempic's kind of there, it calms the noise, but that's just, I forgot to mention that before. So I want to make sure I said that. But from a titrating off standpoint, my biggest thing is making sure from a metabolism standpoint, if we can make sure that you are eating an amount that's still reasonable, maybe you're in a deficit, ideally you're still in a deficit, but then we can slowly start to rebuild it back up and have them say, hey, I can hit these targets every single day. If I can hit these targets every single day, then I have confidence that as I need to reverse diet, if I choose to reverse diet and I want to eat more, I'm going to do so in a slow and controlled manner, because otherwise that's exactly what's going to happen. They're going to come off the drug. They're suddenly, any sort of hormonal suppression from a hunger standpoint is going to go nuts, and they're going to eat a bunch of more food than they're used to, and the weight's going to come back. So it really just becomes, hey, can we get you in a position where, as the doctor, I don't do any of the titration, right? But as the doctor starts to bring it down, how can we make sure everything else in your life is set up for success so you don't have to stress about this rebound nastiness that is very likely to happen if you don't have the right fail safes in place? Yeah,
it's a good way to put it. Fail safes and the titration and kind of increasing the calories, or even going to maybe a little bit more aggressively over maintenance as you do it, whatever strategy makes sense for folks, so that once the appetite kicks in, you're actually eating enough that appetite's not as much a concern versus continuing in a dieting phase as you come off, because that's definitely going to be challenging.
That's gonna, not only is it going to be hellish, but then if you're able to change the frame and say, hey, you are likely going to be eating a little bit more, your appetite's going to come back. How can we use this to our advantage? Are we going to go into maybe a more of a strength building phase? If you're able to get the mindset shift with that too, I think it can do amazing things. But someone has to be ready for that point, or otherwise they're going to absolutely fail. Totally
agree. All right, I'm switching it up a little bit here because insulin pumps are an area that I know nothing about. I've known diabetes, I've seen the various technology. I always thought it was kind of interesting how they work and how they've evolved over time. But I guess the question is just maybe tell us a little bit about how it works, but also, do you take breaks from using it? How does that affect the blood sugar management with the other strategies that you work on?
Oh man, I was gonna say I've been on a pump on and off, but mostly on since 2002, which is kind of crazy. So I've seen the evolution of a pump where you have to do all the math yourself and plug in everything to a pump where it does a lot of the work for you, not everything, but a lot of it for you, and can make your life a lot easier. So in a nutshell, someone without a pump, you have type 1 diabetes or you're insulin dependent, you're taking an injection every time you eat. You're taking some sort of basal insulin, long acting, that will last the entire day. What a pump will do is it'll just be constantly giving you teeny little amounts 24/7 to function as that basal. And every time you eat a meal, you dial up and say, hey, I want to eat a meal. This is, 30 grams of carbs. Boom, you take your dose and now you go eat and you're fine. So it makes life a lot simpler because you're taking fewer injections as long as the pump is working. And there's algorithms now that can make life a lot easier. Oh, it sees your blood sugar's going up a little bit. Here's a little bit of insulin for you so you don't have to actively correct it. So from a simplicity standpoint, it can help a lot. It also can shut your insulin down if it notices you're trending down. So for a lot of parents with kids, super, super helpful with these algorithms. For a lot of people, just make life easier. It's amazing. But I would say a couple of things that people get hung up on is they expect it to do everything for them, which it's not going to. You still have to have some sort of active managing role. But when the sites don't work, it's like I'm on an Omnipod right now, which is the wireless one. And when the sites don't work, you're not getting insulin, or you're not getting as much as you think you're getting. So suddenly you could eat a meal, it could be the same meal you eat every day, but if you're not getting the amount of insulin you thought, your blood sugar is shooting up, and there's no real way to bring it down until you replace that site or take an injection. So that's one of the big, I'm going to call it cautionary, but one of the big things that people have to realize is you have to have, a backup plan for that. And there are times where I've gotten frustrated because I've had this for almost 26 years. Like I have scar tissue. So sometimes I run into issues with sites. So that's when I'll take a break, like you're alluding to, where I'll say, I'm going to go on injections for a few days or for a few weeks or a few months, depending how frustrated I am. And then I can always come back.
Cool, man. Thanks for explaining that. Yeah, I wasn't 100% sure how they worked and wanted the audience to understand. And it's just another tool that you've got to be aware of, obviously, as part of the strategy for managing the blood sugar. So kind of related, or maybe not related, but I think you've said that diabetes can be a strength rather than a limitation. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you mean by that.
Hi, my name is Alan, and I just want to give a shout out to Philip Pape of Wits and Weights for being a huge part of the foundation for my continued health and well-being. Philip exemplifies a nutrition coach who demonstrates how much he cares. Philip works tirelessly and with dedication to provide coaching support and major content for us to use. He creates a practical approach from research, and Philip empowers all of us to use food as quality for our health. He is skilled in how to assess and direct nutrition. Philip creates a community full of wisdom, support, and camaraderie. In summary, Philip Pape is the real deal. He knows how to assess and direct nutrition, and he continues to steer me in the right direction. Thank you, Philip.
So I think what was really tough was I was diagnosed at 7, right? So you're 7, you want to just make friends and have fun and, live a second grade life, right? And you're not paying attention to this thing. And I kept getting told, no. You can't get strong. You can't play sports. You can't lift. You can't have the cupcakes with your friends. And it got really frustrating. And so over the years, at first, I was, honestly debilitated to an extent mentally, because I thought I couldn't do any of these things. And every time I tried, I'd run into resistance. But I started realizing that the resilient standpoint, I think, it really builds a lot of resilience, and it forces you to build a lot of resilience. And also thinking about it from just a health standpoint, if you're looking at it as a positive, you're way more in tune with your health than the average person. Like somebody in a conversation who's listening to this is probably already in tune with lifting and working out and food. But someone who's not, relative to that, you're way more, you have to be more in tune. I have to know everything that's going on in my body. I have to be paying attention to my sleep. There's 40 plus factors that can impact your blood sugar at any given moment. I need to be paying attention to these things. So while it takes up a lot of bandwidth, I feel like from a longevity standpoint, as long as blood sugars are maintained, I think in a really weird way, this is keeping me on my toes and more accountable, because you get real immediate feedback if you're not paying attention.
Yeah. To the point where it threatens your very physiology and your life. I imagine, not too fine a point on it. So then based on that, what you've learned and kind of the insights you've had, are there a couple big lessons that you like to share with folks, whether they're dealing with diabetes or not, for training, nutrition, whatever, and it could be mindset, could be psychology you've taken away from that experience?
I think one huge thing I've seen, again, with myself, with patients, is you have to everyone has to understand, from a consistency standpoint, you're not going to just explode to perfection right away. And so with your blood sugars, right, if you're like, my numbers are way higher than they should be, you can't expect in 2 weeks your blood sugars are going to be perfect. If you're trying to lose 50 pounds, you didn't take 2 weeks to, gain the 50 pounds. You're probably not going to take 2 weeks to lose it. So I think just keeping expectations tempered and enjoying the ride along the way. It's just like with anything in life, I think that's going to be absolutely paramount. But I also think the more I've seen it within diabetes, and obviously, with life in general, lifting pretty moderate, heavy to heavy, a good amount of times, typically solves a lot of problems that otherwise would be very nasty. So the more I've done it, I'm like, I got into this when I was 14. Like, I really love lifting. I don't think I understood the benefit at the time and the significance. You start when you're 14 for aesthetics and for sports, but realizing as a lifelong thing, this is massive for people with diabetes.
Yeah. And I would extend that to say it is massive for everyone, because that message is the message I try to share on every podcast I go on. And I'm surprised sometimes when I talk to like a health coach who's like, well, I don't really lift weights. I'm like, you're missing out on the biggest piece of the pie, in my opinion. So, I love what you said about, you can't explode to perfection. We are not just a society, but as a species, we want to get things solved. Like, once we know we have a goal, we want to go after it. We want to get it solved. And we're like, how do we make that happen as quickly as possible? And so when you combine that with realistic expectations, like it's going to take time, and enjoying the ride, meaning, you could still get dopamine hits and short-term wins anyway, if you're smart about like constructing the process the right way, it can all work out. I was talking to Nick Delgadillo. He's the CEO of Starting Strength Gyms. And he was talking about how like new lifters will get that self-motivation once they start seeing the results come fast, especially when you're, you're squatting 3 times a week and weight's going up every time. But then after a certain period of time, it starts to get really hard and the progress starts to slow down. And you can't just necessarily be a lifter for its own sake, right? You have to kind of parlay that into maybe a sport or something you enjoy or whatever. And I joked because I said, well, I actually do love lifting, and some people just love it for its own sake. He's like, cool, you're the easiest person to coach, aren't you? What are your thoughts on that in terms of people who don't lift regularly and are listening, being consistent, getting in the gym, thinking it's not something for me, or I don't like it. How do I get to like it? Those things. How do I start? How do I be consistent? How do I become a lifter for life?
I think for some people I've talked to, especially, they're even nervous about the gym, right? Because there's, oh my God, everyone's going to be watching me and looking, when nobody actually cares. And if anything, they'll be nice and supportive. But if they're in their heads, I'll be like, let's get you started with something at home. You can get a couple of resistance bands. You can use your body weight, and you can do a lot with just those 2 things. But, then you add in, a couple little weights. And then when you're comfortable, hey, let me go into the gym and let me make it a twice a week thing. I'm going twice a week for half an hour. I know at that half hour mark, I'm done. I'm good. But then just being able to then slowly build. Let's add that 3rd day. Let's add that 4th day. Let's extend it by 10 minutes. Suddenly you look back, and a year from now, you just went from, I'm barely squeaking in there twice a week for 30 minutes to I'm here 4 times a week for an hour. And as you start to see those gains, like you were alluding to, people start to see that, and they're like, I want to keep seeing these gains. I want to see this progress. I see the changes in my body. And that's, I feel like, how people tend to, at least from what I've seen, fall in love with it, is they see the progress, but then also they don't realize until they look back, whoa, I'm here way more than I ever thought I would be.
For sure. Take the action, get the result, get the motivation, and make sure to look back at what's happened in the before and after.
You have to.
Yeah.
And I'm bad at that myself. Yeah. There are times where I'm like, wow, I just didn't. And I'm like, oh, but I was supposed to do that. And so that's a problem that I work on all the time, where I'm like, I need to give myself some credit. But to that point, right, I vividly remember too, one patient where she started out eating 40 grams of protein a day, and she thought that was a lot. And a year later, she was at 150 grams just plowing. And she was like, I eat 150 grams of protein every day. I'm like, yeah, remember when you could only eat 40? And she's like, how did I live? I was like, great question. Only you can answer that.
Exactly.
But that's I think a way to kind of summarize that part, where you don't realize how much you've done until you look back and say, wow, that was awesome.
For sure. Always good to have some mindset psychology on this show because that's what a lot of times people struggle with, not just the nuts and bolts and the information. So we've addressed some fear mongering. We've addressed some myths. We've addressed blood sugar management. Speaking of blood sugar, I guess, you and I talked before we recorded about some of the hot, spicy topics. I guess what would be something that's, I guess, on the dangerous side that is being promoted by the gurus and the fitfluencers related to blood sugar, that they just totally get it wrong and it could actually hurt people maybe?
Man, that is a good one. Because I feel like a lot of them, everybody still talks about, when you're done working out, you better have this massive insulin spike. So you better spike your blood sugar with all these carbs. And like, I wouldn't even say it's necessarily dangerous. It's been around since I started lifting, right? I remember seeing some post-workout article in one of the, what was it? Men Muscle and Fitness, Men's Health, one of those things. You remember that stuff, I'm sure, where it's like, oh yeah, this article and you have to eat 130 grams of carbs after you lift. I'm like, that's a lot of carbs. Like I have diabetes. That's probably not going to work for me. You don't need to actually do that. From what I've seen in the research has shown, you don't really have to do that either. But I wouldn't even say it's dangerous. It's dangerous for people within the diabetes space. But I haven't seen tons of craziness. I'm sure there is. I also don't always go looking for it, which is probably for my own sanity's sake, because I see enough stuff about nasty blood sugars and how to cure your diabetes and getting told that you can, eat random things. So I see enough of that I'm like, I don't want to fill my brain with more trash,
All right. I get that, man. Yeah. I wish I could just get rid of social media altogether and just delete it all. And
there's days I'm like, could I live off the grid? Would it be fun? And then I'm like, no, in 2 days, I want to see what people are doing.
Exactly. All right. So then let's go more moderate approach. I alluded to fiber once, I think, talking about carnivore. What role does it play in blood sugar control? Is it necessary? Because some people say, well, it's not essential, just like carbs aren't essential. What are your thoughts on fiber?
I don't know if I'd go so far to say necessary, but I would say doing two things. One would be slowing down the potential blood sugar spike. So you eat a meal and, if your blood sugar would have gone, I'm just going to throw out arbitrary numbers. If it would have gone to 180, if you got a good amount of fiber, maybe you're only going to 140 just because it slows digestion so much. I think, and I don't have all of the fun, super in-depth data on this, but I do know from a gut health perspective, there's a lot of links with gut health and blood sugars and the microbiome and the different, possibilities of if your microbiome's off, your blood sugar control could get worse. That's, I think, the bigger thing with fiber is I think there's a lot of impact on the gut that people don't pay attention to.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think there are very many people who are educated enough or expert enough to convey the full answer. But there is someone, oh man, what's his name? Justin Cottle. Do you know Justin Cottle? He is an anatomy researcher. He worked at the anatomy lab. It's the big one. I forget the name. He's also a YouTuber now. Really nice guy. Actually remind me a lot of him because he's very nuanced, positive guy, doesn't want to fearmonger any of this stuff. And he'll give you a really good explanation of the whole digestive tract and how fiber affects the microbiota and how diverse sources of fiber and even eating different apples on different days, the different pectins from the different skins will feed that bacteria. And we just don't know. So I worry that someone eating carnivore 20 years from now, will they have some effect that we haven't been able to study yet because of the length? But, we know having fiber has positive outcomes. So I don't know what having no fiber, what the outcome is going to be is the question. Yeah.
I don't know if I want to know, honestly, because even in the keto people, at least they're getting fiber. It may be crazy amounts. It might be manufactured, but it's something.
For sure. For sure. All right, man. Well, with all of this stuff, is there anything that we didn't cover, anything you wished I would have asked? And then what would your answer be?
Man, honestly, it's one of the most fun in-depth ones I've gotten to do in a long time. So I'm feeling like we covered a lot of stuff. I don't want to overdo it.
Cool, man. No, that works. That works. I think you covered all the main points. Where do you want people to look your stuff up and learn more about this?
I would say if people are interested, diabetes or not, my team and I are able to work with, people from all walks of life who want that nutritional insight, especially in relation to blood sugars. But at Man of Zeal on Instagram and TikTok. So MANOFTZEEL. And then yourdiabetesinsider.com is the place for, what our team does. We've got free stuff on there. We've got tons of different freebies, opt-ins, and, knowledge for you to be able to learn more about diabetes and make your life better.
And there's a podcast too, right?
There is a podcast, the Your Diabetes Insider podcast, very cleverly named. So that one's a lot of fun if you want to hear some more real raw rants and fun, nuanced diabetes knowledge. For sure. Yeah. So we'll throw those in the show notes. Man of Zeal at IG. That's with the silent T in there. Yourdiabetesinsider.com and your Insider Diabetes. I'm sorry, I flipped them. Which is the domain? The domain is... Oh, your yourdiabetiesinsider.com and then Your Diabetes Insider podcast.
Okay.
So super original on the podcast.
No, that's good. I switched the podcast name. All right, man. Well, yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun, Ben. I appreciate your approach to all of this. And I like that people have, the flexibility, no matter whether they're on the diabetes or not, to really kind of eat and train in a lot of different ways, as long as they're doing it and living an active lifestyle, right? Just not for blood sugar alone, but just to thrive. So thank you so much for sharing that message.
I'm just grateful that I got to chat with you and hopefully educate some people, diabetes or not, that, it doesn't have to restrict your life.
Awesome, man. So great for having you on. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.